exercise self-determination. What a hypocrisy! We're going to have lots of speakers today who are going to be talking about everything I've just mentioned and more, but it is so important that we are here to express our outrage, to demand that so-called Australia cut ties with Israel right now. We cannot wait. It needs to happen right now. I'd like to acknowledge that we're all meeting and mourning today on stolen land. It is not a coincidence that the Australian colony stands so brazenly with Israel. These lands, these waterways and these skies always were and always will be First Nations lands, and our fight against white supremacy, our fight against colonialism, our fight against racist ideologies must extend to our brothers and sisters on this continent. In the spirit of 50 plus years of blackfella and Palestinian solidarity, I'd like to invite our first speaker, my good friend Ethan Floyd. Ethan Floyd is a descendant of the Wiradjuri Desert Warriors who were among the first to experience and resist colonization, and the storytellers of well-known country. Ethan is a student at the University of Sydney, a community activist and a believer in the power of global solidarity through shared struggle. Give it up for Ethan Floyd!
Always was, always will be. Always was, always will be. Always was, always will be. I want to thank Rand and the community for inviting me out here to speak today. My name is Ethan Floyd. Like Rand said, I'm a descendant of the Wiradjuri and the Walewan people, the first storytellers, the first activists, and the first resistors on this continent. Because I'm not of this place, I offer this to the Gadigal people and those native language. We say Yamangindur Maranga Wanabulagu. The Gan Mujara Yama Gadigal, Maini Iora, Gurumbang Gujigawa Yawu, the Gan Bawamalia, Gindangara Yamandu, Guragambalana. That means we acknowledge these people, we acknowledge their struggle, and we acknowledge the resistance of Gadigal elders throughout the years, throughout the decades, and throughout so much oppression that they face from the government. As we reflect on the past few months, what's evident to me is that First Nations people here in Australia and Palestinians around the world are joined in our shared struggle for liberation. As we can see from the unconditional support Israel continues to receive from the United States, from Canada, from much of Europe, and from here in Australia, settler colonial solidarity is a global movement. And so Indigenous solidarity and Indigenous liberation must be too. From the river to the sea. From the river to the sea. We cannot think about the struggle of Palestinians and those living under Israel's brutal occupation without also considering the struggle of First Nations people on this land. Yesterday was an agonizing day, but it was a galvanizing day. It confirmed two things for us. One, that Australians have failed the judgment test time and time again in its outrageous treatment of First Nations people and its inexplicable siding with a settler colonial state such as Israel. And two, that we as First Nations people have yet again failed the judgment test by placing our faith in Australians. We should not, and you should not, place your faith in Australia. Now we're under no illusions about the kind of settler colonial project we live under. It is one which rejects any offer from First Nations people to correct the past injustices. It is one which is steadfast in its denial of that which we as First Nations people are entitled to. And it is one which has said to us, once again, what it has always said to us: you are not welcome here, you do not belong here. Shame! It is the same message which Israel is sending to Palestinians, except white Australians have sent their message on a ballot paper. Israel sends theirs with rockets. Shame. Mandela wrote in The Long Walk to Freedom that it is always the oppressor who dictates the terms of the struggle, never the oppressed. If the oppressor uses violence, then the oppressed have no alternative but to respond violently. And it's the same that is true in South Africa. It is the same that is true here on this continent. And it is the same that is true in Palestine and in Gaza. Settler colonial violence must be met with indigenous violence. It is only through a strong resistance will we be liberated. To our Palestinian brothers here today living in the diaspora or caught in Israel's campaign of annihilation, we say this. From Gadigal to Gaza, from Wiradjuri to the West Bank, from your Nakba to our invasion day, we are bonded in our shared struggle and our determination to liberate ourselves from colonial oppressors. I want to leave you today, whether you are Palestinian or First Nations, with some commandments, some guides for the coming struggle, handed down to us in 1969 by Ujjuru Nunakabal, to guide you through what is sure to be a difficult and sustained struggle. Please repeat them after me. Thou shalt gather thy scattered people together. Thou shalt work for black liberation. Thou shalt resist assimilation with all thy might. Thou shalt not become a black liberal in a white society. Thou shalt not uphold the white lies in a black society. Thou shalt take back land stolen from thy forefathers. Thou shalt meet white violence with black violence. Thou shalt remove themselves from a sick white society. Thou shalt find peace and happiness in a stable black society. Thou shalt think black and act black. Thou shalt be black all the rest of thy days. Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Always was, always will be!
Always was, always will be!
Aboriginal land!
Aboriginal land!
Always was, always will be!
Always was, always will be!
Aboriginal land!
Aboriginal land!
Thank you, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Gaza, Gaza, don't you cry!
Gaza, Gaza, don't you cry!
Palestine will never die!
Palestine will never die!
Gaza, Gaza, don't you cry!
Gaza, Gaza, don't you cry!
Palestine will never die!
Palestine will never die!
Thank you so much for that speech, Ethan. And so I'm the co-chair today, Josh Lewis from the Palestine Action Group. I just have a few things about the protest today that we need to talk about. We've already heard from Rand earlier and from Ethan. We know about the disgusting complicity by which Western governments are supporting the crimes of Israel. We know right now the United States, the United Kingdom are sending extra naval vessels to support so that Israel never runs out of bullets or shells to drop on civilians in Gaza. Partly how that Western support for Israel plays out, of course, and we've seen this in the last week in spades, is that they want to stop us from being able to protest. We've seen over the last week an incredible, hysterical, repressive, anti-protest, anti-democratic environment whipped up by our politicians and by the media, and including, shamefully, by our Premier Chris Minns. Now, we need to be very clear about this. We will not stop protesting for Palestine. oldest tricks in the book, if you like, is to slander Palestine activists as being anti-Semitic. We have to be very clear about this. Our movement is absolutely against anti-Semitism. It has nothing in common with what we're fighting for. Ours is a movement against racism. That's exactly what we're fighting for. Palestinians are treated brutally. They're described as animals, as cockroaches by the Zionist state of Israel. That's what we're against. We're against the state of Israel. We're never against Jewish people. And there is a long and proud and wonderful history of many Jews around the world being part of our movement for a free Palestine. And we'll be hearing today from two speakers from the Jewish community to reinforce that point. These are people who are not new to our movement. These are people who have been protesting for decades for a free Palestine. So we have to be clear today. As I said, even if we do everything absolutely 100% perfectly, the media will denounce us as anti-Semites anyway. We know that's true. However, it obviously does not help that on the Monday night protest we held after our rally, a tiny, tiny group of people did actually chant anti-Semitic slogans. So we have to be totally clear that today and for every future protest, none of that will ever happen again. And if anyone even begins to chant such slogans, everyone around them must and will tell them to shut up. That this is not what we're about. Doing that is not only wrong and racist in its own right, as we know, it massively harms the Palestinian cause for people to do that. It gives the media, who want to denounce us anyway, a free kick, which we definitely do not want to give them. Anyone who is a true supporter of Palestine would never make such a chant. Okay. On another vein, we know the media and the police and the government are looking for any excuse to try to crack down on our right to protest. So that's another thing we need to be very clear on today. Today we must be disciplined, we must be very peaceful, and that's true even if people try to provoke us, and we can't rule that out. So there will be people today who try to cause trouble, who try to, pretend they're part of our protest while here to cause trouble, or people who come from outside trying to provoke us. We need to be very clear, we need to be very calm, we need to ignore them, we need to be disciplined. Because we need to fight and to continue to demand our right to protest in this state. And on that front, we have already lodged the paperwork to say that next Saturday, the 21st of October, we are going to be holding another protest at Town Hall. And we are going to be marching on our streets. Democratic right. Now, what happens today will partly determine how the courts and the government look upon that. So again, it's why we need to be extra disciplined today, so that we have an extra basis to fight for our right to protest next week. Whatever happens, we will protest next week, let me be clear. We will not stop. Okay, so thank you for that, and I know everyone here understands exactly what that's all about. So we need to be disciplined, we need to make sure everyone around us is doing the same, so that we can continue to fight forever for a free Palestine. And on that note, I'll introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Fahad Ali. He's a Palestinian, he's an academic, he's a long-running activist for a free Palestine, and he's going to talk to you more now.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Fahad Ali. I'm a Palestinian. My grandparents were ethnically cleansed in 1948 in what we call the Nakba, the foundational genocide of the Palestinian people, in which more than 700,000 Palestinians were forced off our land by the state of Israel during its formation, aided and abetted by the rest of the world. And now we see the consequence of that catastrophe. 75 years of dispossession. 75 years of occupation. For 75 years, the Palestinian people have had no justice. Palestinians have said for decades, we've protested, we've gone out onto the streets, we've called for the international community to intervene. We've tried to shine a light on the horrors that are inflicted upon us. For decades, these horrors have been inflicted upon us. This did not start on the weekend. This has been ongoing for 7 decades. And what did the world do? What did the world do when faced with images of the apartheid brutality in the West Bank? Gaza has been under blockade for 16 years. What did the world do in years past? What did the world do in years past when after every single war on Gaza, the asymmetric death toll left Palestinians dead in the thousands? And now, we have warned, and we had warned over several years, that this state of affairs could not be maintained indefinitely unless Palestinians were granted freedom, unless we were liberated, unless we had rights to life and liberty. Unless we had that, violence would be the obvious consequence, because you cannot keep a people locked up, chained, subject to brutality and occupation and the indignity of the military violence that Israel subjugates us with every single day, and not expect that to somehow come crashing down. But what did the world do? The world has turned a blind eye, and when major human rights organizations, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, even Israeli human rights organizations calling what was happening in Palestine apartheid, what did our foreign minister say? I don't think that's a very helpful thing to say, she said. And this is what we're getting at. This absolute refusal to hold Israel to account by the same standards of international law that the West claims to hold so highly in regard. When it comes to Israel, that is thrown out the window. Just this morning, in announcing humanitarian assistance to Gaza, finally, Penny Wong said, even in that statement, she said, Israel has the right to defend itself and we support that. But where are Palestinians' right to defend ourselves? As we are being slaughtered. 700 dead Palestinian children in the last week alone. And I am on the brink of tears because I am looking at the children sitting right here before me.
Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine!
These children are the future of Palestine. And I do not want them, and I don't want my own children, my own grandchildren, to be born into a world where they don't have the right to dignity and justice and peace. We need to be clear more than ever. More than ever, we need to call for an end to the occupation, a call for the end to the blockade. We need to stand up against this. And the international community is culpable. And the international community, who is now whipping up racist campaigns against Palestinians. There's calls now in Britain to ban the Palestinian flag. This disgraceful racism against us, when they are the root cause of the violence that we have seen this past week. They are the progenitors of that violence. If we want peace, then we need to work towards peace. We can no longer claim to desire peace, claim to desire a solution, but actually do nothing
to move towards it except grant Israel every kind of impunity as they violate every single human rights law that we know of. Enough is enough. And my message to our elected leaders is you can see. Earlier this week, Chris Minns, the Premier of New South Wales, his government was saying, don't come to this protest. His government was saying we only expect maybe 300 people to turn up. There are thousands of people here. The world can no longer turn a blind eye. And it is a testament to the struggle, the steadfastness of Palestinians everywhere that we have not given up and we will never give up. And that is exactly why we're all here today. And my message to our politicians is listen to us. Palestine will be free and a day of reckoning is coming. A day of reckoning is coming where one day in the future you will have to contend with the fact that as a genocide was being perpetrated, you did nothing. Sure. And that shame will stain you forever. Thank you.
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
From the river to the sea!
From the river to the sea!
Palestine will be free!
Palestine will be free!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Gaza!
Free, free Gaza!
I'd like to welcome our next speaker, Professor Peter Slezak. Peter is a beautiful Jewish old man. Peter decade and a voice for boycotts, divestments, and sanctions on Israel.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege for me to be here today on this very difficult time. Let me begin by adding some remarks to what Josh said. My parents were survivors of the Holocaust. I think I know anti-Semitism when I see it. I grew up with their stories. I want to pay particular tribute publicly to the organisers of this rally, like every other rally over the years that I've had the privilege to attend and to speak at. I want to pay tribute particularly to the Palestinian community and all of you for clearly and loudly saying each time, as we just did, that we reject anti-Semitism and it's not anti-Jewish to protest the crimes of the State of Israel. I'm one of the very many Jews here and around the world, it's important to know, who are distressed, shamed, not for the first time, by what Israel has been doing in our name. I'm privileged here in Australia and elsewhere to have very dear Palestinian friends here and in Palestine. And I'm devastated to see, not for the first time, their anguish, their heartbreak, the horrors and the suffering that they have to endure. But like many Jews, I also have close family in Israel, and I share their grief over the atrocities and loss that they have suffered. We must be able, as many Jews have been saying recently, to grieve and mourn both Palestinian and Israeli deaths. Israeli and Western leaders have actually dehumanized the Palestinians, but the response from us cannot be to dehumanize the Israelis. If we lose our moral consistency, we weaken the Palestinian cause. Speaking to the Jews, one Jewish writer has said just today that our humanity is being put to the test. This is now in relation to the tragedy, the awful things happening in Gaza. It's in the same spirit that a rabbi in New York has just said, and I won't read it all. He said that even as we mourn our dead in Israel, we must acknowledge and protest the genocide Israel is currently perpetrating against the Palestinians. He went on to something that he said, that if we ignore this reality, without commenting and committing ourselves to the cause, without fighting actively for the Palestinian people, we will be complicit in this horrible bloodshed. So in London and in New York, there are huge crowds of Jews assembling to protest the US-backed Israeli attacks on Gaza. They're chanting, "Not in our name," and I'm proud to stand with them and with you in solidarity with the Palestinian people. But the Palestinian cause on the other side for national liberation and self-determination is based on justice, human rights and international law. But this means we can't ignore, of course, or condone the recent atrocities perpetrated on innocent civilians. We may follow the Palestinian ambassador to the UK, the very articulate Hussam Zomlot, who said, "We must regain the moral high ground. We undermine the Palestinian cause if we look away." In other words, we must understand and explain the causes of the recent tragic events, which is not to justify them. The attack on Israelis was said to be unprovoked, but in fact it was a desperate breakout from a concentration camp by the people of Gaza. The world only pays attention when Israelis are killed and Palestine resists. But the tragic suffering of Gaza and Palestine didn't begin last week. The people of Gaza have been under the most brutal, inhumane and illegal blockade. It's a crime in international law for the past 16 years. Gaza's caged population has been traumatized beyond endurance. What did Israel and the world community expect? How can you trap 2-point-some million people in Gaza, half of whom are children, in one of the most densely populated places on the planet for 16 years? What did Israel or the world community expect? How can you keep people in such conditions? And it has to be said, Israel, contrary to its claims, didn't leave Gaza, as they kept saying. Israel withdrew its soldiers and its settlers in 2005, but it controls every single aspect of the Gazans' life. It controls every entry, exit, as well as Gaza's airspace and coastline. It controls and restricts Gaza's electricity, and they suffer from severe shortages. Israel prevents farmers to have access to the most fertile parts of the farming land. Israel limits fishing in Gaza's territorial waters. Israel calculated, this is the most sick kind of policies, Israel actually calculated the amount of food allowed into Gaza, the number of calories that they could have. It's so that the Gazan people would starve but not quite die. They described this policy as putting the Palestinians on a diet. Shame. In 2018, not so long ago, in the Great March of Return, Israeli snipers lined up on a barricade and shot dead nurses, disabled people in wheelchairs, and hundreds of unarmed civilians. We all know they have endured 4 devastating military assaults, unequal military assaults since 2008. Let me just list a few of the features of Palestine and Gaza's suffering in particular. 70% of the population of Gaza are on humanitarian aid. 40% are unemployed. 10% of the children under 5 have stunted growth due to malnutrition. 60% of Gaza's school children are anemic. And 90% of the water in Gaza is unsafe for human consumption. Shame on Israel. Of course, as we've heard today, the usual cry is that Israel has the so-called right to defend itself, but it's not self-defense to starve the people of Gaza. That's pure barbarity and a crime in international law. The suggestion that there's no provocation, maybe all of this could be seen as provocation. In fact, it amounts to collective punishment under international law. And the civilian population is being persecuted and treated under the crime of the 4th Geneva Convention. This is under the watch and the protection of the governments, including our own. Shame. Of course, we ask, how long did the world expect Palestinians to endure this brutality and dehumanization? And of course, as has already been said, it's not just Israel, but Western governments and complicit media, including our own, who are to blame. Their silence and indifference to the desperate suffering of the Palestinians is a direct cause of the recent events. Let me talk about the recent events quickly before I wind up. The present assault on Gaza is, of course, not a war, but a cowardly act of terrorism. It's perpetrated by the most sophisticated military force against a defenceless population. Gaza doesn't have F-16 jets or Merkava tanks or assault rifles. Israel's Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant, has openly, publicly admitted they're committing major war crimes. They don't hide their intentions at all. And the world... Besides what has gone before, he's of course called the people, the Palestinians in Gaza, animals, and he announced now the full closure of the Gaza Strip, including cutting food supplies, water, electricity and fuel. These are the most grotesque war crimes. The horrifying images online which we can see, which the world doesn't see enough, and the casualty figures speak for themselves. Entire civilian residential districts are bombed to rubble. This is not targeted at Hamas or anybody else. This is a devastation of the civilian population, as we can see. It's a shocking fact, I just read, that Israel has dropped more bombs on Gaza in 6 days than the US dropped on Afghanistan in 1 year. To their credit to some of the Jewish activists that I follow and admire, the Israeli scholar and activist Jeff Halper, he said that Israel is in the process of committing genocide in Gaza. That's no longer hyperbole or exaggeration, and it's abetted by our own government. Of course, it's important for me to say one other thing about this. This is not military necessity, as we know, but in case you're not aware, this is actually an explicit policy of the Israeli government, military policy. It has a name. It's called the Dahiyah Doctrine. Google it and see that they are deliberately targeting civilians on a massive scale. This is the Israeli approach to the Palestinians generally. Let me wind up. Since 1948 in Palestine, the Jews are not the victims, we are the perpetrators. Today, who among us are those that the Jews refer to from the Second World War as the righteous among the nations, the one that stood up against the crimes of their own people? We can't remain silent when the crimes are being committed in our name. So I call on the Jewish people in particular to learn the right lessons of our own experience as victims of prejudice, racism and genocide. We have this slogan, never again, but never again can't mean just to Jews. It means never again to anybody. Finally, we must stand in solidarity with the Palestinian struggle and the Gazan struggle in particular for national liberation and self-determination towards a very long denied peace with justice. We must demand an end to the Israeli assault on Gaza. We must have a shared vision for the future of all the people of the region, Israelis and Palestinians alike. And this means from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Ramia Abdul Sultan. Ramia is an Australian Palestinian lawyer and the executive committee. She's on the executive committee of the Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network. She's also got family in Gaza, and so please send her the most sincerest solidarity and love right now. Give it up for Ramia. Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all. I want to make sure that you can all hear me loud and clear. Let me hear you loud and clear. I'd like to acknowledge that we stand today on Aboriginal land. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and honour their struggle for justice, and I acknowledge today is a difficult day for many First Nations people across this continent. Firstly, thank you to all who is here today. Thank you for showing courage and bravery despite the fear-mongering and the restrictions our wonderful government has demonstrated over the last week. Thank you to all who care for humanity and human life. Again, I ask you all to remain composed and to follow instructions so we have this opportunity again and again until Palestine is free. Like many of you here today, I barely slept the night. How could I sleep when I read a chilling message sent by a family member, possibly for the last time, and I read her words? My name is Bayan Abu Sultan. I have lived in my beautiful city, Gaza, for 27 years, and today may be my last day. My family and I will not make the mistake of the Nakba of 1948, and we will not leave our home. We are proud of our Palestinian blood until our last breath. I do not forgive the world from east to west for what will happen to us, and I hope our pictures will haunt you all until the end of your life. These are her words. This morning I woke up, I was overcome with guilt. How can I be afforded the luxury of going to the bathroom at my disposal when thousands of Gazans right now, including my family, are crammed in the UN schools which have capacity for 1,500 students but currently holding 5,000 Gazan refugees, where needing to go to the bathroom causes you to wait 400 people just to go to the bathroom. We can drink water at any time, and those in Gaza have been deprived. Parents telling their children, despite the limited food and water, try not to eat too much because the toilets are not accessible. How tormented must these parents feel to watch their children go hungry and thirsty? What monstrosity is Israel perpetuating against innocent civilians? Family has told me that parts of Gaza, the Israeli military has proceeded to pour cement into numerous water supply pipes to forever block water. Have you heard of such wicked barbarity anywhere else in the world? I am tired. I am drained. We all know the story. It's been on repeat for 75 years. 75 years of occupation, of oppression, of injustice. 16 years of blockades on Gaza and a complete blockade over the last week. What place in the world has no access to food, medicine and fuel, intentionally cut off by an occupier, and be allowed to do this by the rest of the world? The world enabling the barbaric, brutal, oppressive action of the occupying colonial force Israel to get away with genocide. As we speak, the world needs to know Gaza is no longer the largest open-air prison. It is a concentration camp. The brutal colonizer is adamant to obliterate the Palestinian population, move them on, and then flatten Gaza to make way for more illegal settlements. There is a clear agenda to see Gaza into a blackout, not only from electricity, but when the phones die, the Gazan population will no longer be able to share their first-hand accounts of the atrocities and the horrors that will unfold on the ground. It will be worse than 1948 with the advanced military equipment and weaponry of today. The Gazan population will be massacred and the world remains silent. Gaza is a refugee camp. Understand this. The Palestinians in Gaza don't belong in Gaza. They once fled their homes in what we call Israel today. They are going to be displaced yet again and become refugees for the second, third, fourth, 10th time. The world, including our government, must not grant Israel impunity
and disregard the international human rights laws in place. I leave you all with a message of hope, with a message to not feel helpless and to not despair. God chose us to be here. We need to play a part in putting pressure on the Australian government and the whole international community to call to go in right now. We need to call upon our global community to call Israel out for its brutality. Keep sharing the Palestinian stories, especially now before there will be a blackout. Put pressure on your government. Follow organizations that are doing the groundwork here, such as APAN and many other organizations. And most importantly, pray for the people of Palestine. Keep them in your dua. Wake up in the middle of the night and beseech God for justice and for freedom from the oppressors. We can do this.
Kids have you killed today?
Israel, USA, how many kids have you killed today?
Just very quickly before I introduce our next speaker, on our theme before of our need to be very peaceful and disciplined, one thing I forgot to say before is that we're asking people here, unless of course it's for religious reasons or for medical reasons, to please don't cover your faces. If people come in with their faces covered, it just makes it easier, as I said before, potentially for people wanting to cause trouble, infiltrators who pretend to be part of our cause but who are not, to do that. So please just keep your faces clear as possible. Thank you, everyone. Okay, our next speaker is Michelle Birkin. She's from two Jewish organizations, from Jews Against the Occupation and also an anti-Zionist Jewish collective called Zedek. Her grandparents survived the Holocaust, and she's here again to talk to us about Jewish support for the Palestinian freedom. Thank you, Michelle.
Down, down, Israel! Down, down, Israel! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine!
First and foremost, I want to is unsealable to land. I respect Indigenous Australians ongoing connection to country. I respect the elders, past, present and I also want to acknowledge the unstinting work of the two Jewish groups that I represent today, Jews Against the Occupation and Zedek. I am a secular Jew. My Jewishness is so deeply embedded that it is inseparable from my nature. It shapes my morality, my worldview, my politics. I was brought up with my grandparents who escaped pogroms in Europe, only to watch in helpless horror and despair and grief as everyone else in their families was wiped from the face of the earth, while the rest of the world stood by watching our Holocaust, just as we stand by and watch the genocide of Palestinians committed by the pure evil state of Israel. Right now, as we speak, as we stand here, Israel is committing unspeakable and unbearable atrocities in Gaza. Yet somehow we must continue to speak of them especially to politicians who mouth despicable platitudes that we should not protest, but go home and pray. And politicians who argue that Israel has the right to defend itself. Since when is genocide self-defense? Since when does an occupier have the right to crush into oblivion people whom it has brutalised and dehumanised, persecuted and oppressed for decades? I was once a Zionist. At my synagogue, love for Israel was interwoven with love for the Jewish people. I learned to speak Hebrew. I lived and worked on a kibbutz. I fully intended to immigrate. Having known anti-Semitism from my school, from other children, and from random individuals on the street, the idea of a Jewish state was very seductive. However, life went in a different direction, and in July 2014, I was in Sydney with a television, and everything changed. In the heartbreaking horror and suffering inflicted on Gaza, I saw the reality of Israel. I saw its inhumanity, its unfettered brutality, its unhinged violence. I looked into an abyss, and that abyss swallowed every illusion I had ever had about the state of Israel. It almost swallowed me. If this was what my people had become, who am I? But my Jewishness also held lessons in humanity, in morality, and in steadfastness. So I am here, one of the growing number of Jews around the world who reject the hijacking and destruction of our identity by this colonial, supremacist, apartheid, genocidal state. One of our rabbis taught that the world is a very narrow bridge, and each of us must cross it, and we must have no fear at all. So we must remain steadfast, guided by what we know to be right and true, not tempted by the demons of revenge or despair, or the rage and overwhelming grief that we are experiencing and that threaten to eclipse our humanity. We must be united in our insistence on our right to publicly mourn Palestinian deaths, to protest Israel's genocide in Gaza, to continue the struggle for justice until Palestine is free.
On Palestine that was recently released just a